From Macbeth, you can read the character of Macbeth or Macbeth as a tragic hero. Aristotle, in his Poetics, defines a tragic hero as a character of noble stature and virtue who is not wholly good or evil, but whose downfall is brought about by a hamartia or a tragic flaw and by fate. The tragic hero's misfortune is not wholly deserved, and their fall evokes pity and fear in the audience, leading to catharsis. Aristotle writes, "A man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty." The tragic hero must be of high status, possess a tragic flaw, experience a reversal of fortune, and recognize their errors. But this recognition comes too late to avert disaster. At the play's outset, Macbeth is presented as a noble and valiant warrior, highly esteemed by King Duncan and his peers. He is the Thane of Glamis and later the Thane of Cawdor, rewarded for his bravery in battle. For brave Macbeth, well, he deserves that name, disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution. These establishes Macbeth's high status, fulfilling Aristotle's first criteria for a tragic hero. Macbeth's tragic flaw is his vaulting ambition, which is ignited by the witch's prophecies and further fueled by Lady Macbeth's manipulation. He is not innately evil, but his desire for power overcomes his moral scruples. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. Initially, Macbeth hesitates to murder Duncan, showing a conscience and awareness of right and wrong. However, Lady Macbeth questions his manhood and resolve, pushing him toward regicide. "When you durst do it, then you were a man." This marks the beginning of his moral descent as he chooses ambition over virtue. After Duncan's murder, Macbeth's fortune reverses. He is crowned king, but his reign is plagued by paranoia and insecurity. To secure his throne, he orders the murders of Banquo and Macduff's family, becoming increasingly ruthless and isolated. His actions estrange him from Lady Macbeth and the nobility, and he becomes a tyrant, bloody scapegoat. The witch's prophecy, which once inspired hope, now entrap him in a false sense of security, leading to his downfall. Macbeth is a quintessential Aristotelian tragic hero, noble by birth, admirable in many ways, but fatally flawed by ambition. His downfall is precipitated by his own actions, manipulated by external forces, and recognized only when it is too late. Shakespeare crafts a character whose tragedy lies not in villainy but in the ruin of great man by his own hand. Then we have the significance of the Potter scene in William Shakespeare's Macbeth. Macbeth is one of William Shakespeare's most renowned tragedies. It explores the destructive psychological and political consequences of unchecked ambition as it follows the rise and fall of the Scottish general Macbeth. Spurred by the prophecies of three witches and the manipulation of his wife, Macbeth murders King Duncan to seize the throne, only to spiral into paranoia, tyranny, and madness. Marked by its dark atmosphere, supernatural elements, and profound exploration of guilt, fate, and the nature of evil. The Potter appears in Act 2, Scene 3 immediately after the intense and harrowing murder of King Duncan. His primary function is to provide comic relief, easing the overwhelming tension for the audience before the horror of the murder is discovered. Shakespeare often uses such moments of levity in his tragedies to balance emotional intensity. Beyond humor, the Potter scene has deep thematic resonance. The Potter imagines himself as the gatekeeper of Hellgate, drawing a parallel between Macbeth's castle and the hell itself. This not only establishes the castle as a site of damnation following Duncan's murder, but also foreshadows the moral and spiritual descent of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. The Potter's references to sin and equivocation echo the play's motifs of deception and moral ambiguity. So then you can just go through the whole notes. It's a very important question. Then you have the importance of sleepwalking scene in Macbeth. The sleepwalking scene in Shakespeare's Macbeth Act 5 Scene 1 stands as one of the most dramatic and psychologically profound moments in the entire play. This scene, featuring Lady Macbeth's nocturnal wanderings reveals the devastating effects of guilt, serves as a climatic unraveling of her character, and provides a powerful commentary on the consequences of unchecked ambition and moral transgression. Earlier in the play, Lady Macbeth is the chief architect of Duncan's murder, pushing Macbeth and suppressing her own conscience for the sake of power. However, after the murder, she increasingly becomes consumed by psychological torment. By Act 5, Macbeth is embroiled in violent paranoia while Lady Macbeth's mind succumbs to guilt and mental collapse. The scene opens in Dunsinane Castle where a doctor and Lady Macbeth's gentlewoman are discussing the Queen's strange behaviors. I have 2 nights watched with you, but can perceive no truth in your report. What was it she last walked? Why it stood by her? She has lied by her continually. Lady Macbeth, formerly fearless, now demands a light be by her at all times, a symbolic rejection of the darkness in which she once clocked her deeds. The observer's hushed conversation established a tone of mystery and impending tragedy. Then we have the role of Lady Macbeth in the downfall of Macbeth. When Macbeth hesitates to murder King Duncan, she challenges his masculinity and manipulates him with sharp psychological tactics, pushing him to seize power at any moral cost. Then we have the role of supernatural elements in Macbeth. From the very first scene, the play immerses the audience in a world tinged with supernatural. The three witches or weird sisters open the play with their airy chant, "Fear is foul and foul is fear, hover through the fog and fill the air." This paradoxical line establishes the play's theme of appearance versus reality and introduces supernaturalism as a disruptive force that subverts the natural order. The witches' prophecies ignite Macbeth's ambition and set the tragic events in motion. The witches serve as harbingers of doom and agents of fate. Their prediction to Macbeth, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor, all hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king thereafter." It plants the seed of kingship in Macbeth's mind. Their cryptic prophecies manipulate Macbeth by exploiting his latent ambition and moral weakness. Though the witches do not directly command Macbeth to commit a murder, their words and airy presence function as a metaphysical temptation, what Macbeth himself calls instruments of darkness. They embody the dark forces that catalyze his downfall. Comment on the significance of the banquet scene in Macbeth. The banquet scene in Macbeth Act 3 Scene 4 is a crucial turning point in both the play's plot and Macbeth's psychological state. This scene shifts the tone from Macbeth's external consolidation of power to the internal unraveling of his mind. The dramatic appearance of Banquo's ghost during the royal banquet publicly exposes Macbeth's guilt and paranoia, signaling the beginning of his moral and psychological downfall. Again, a very important one. Discuss how Oscar Wilde uses satire in The Importance of Being Earnest to critique the Victorian society, or how Wilde exposes the hypocrisies and absurdities of the upper class and social conventions of the era in the play. Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest is a masterful satirical comedy that exposes the hypocrisies and absurdities of late Victorian society, written during an era preoccupied with appearances, earnestness, and adherence to rigid social codes. Wilde uses the play to lampoon the upper class and their values. Subtitled "A Trivial Comedy for Serious People," the play uses farce, wit, and irony to question what the Victorians considered important and genuine. Satire is a literary device that uses humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize prevailing immorality or foolishness. The three primary types are Horatian satire, juvenile satire, and Menippean satire. Wilde plays primarily uses the Horatian satire, as it mocks but does not fervently condemn, although sharp moments verge on Juvenalian as well. From the opening, Wilde establishes the absurd qualities of Victorian life. Algernon and Jack are introduced, both living double lives to escape oppressive social obligations. The very premise satirizes Victorian duplicity. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. You can just go through the notes. From the importance of being earnest, we have the significance of the dual identities and deception in the play. How do Jack and Algernon's alter egos reflect the conflict between personal desires and societal expectations? Or what does Wilde suggest about the nature of identity and authenticity in Victorian England? Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest thrives on the comedic yet sharp exploration of dual identities and deception. In late Victorian England, a period obsessed with property, reputation, and societal and strict social codes, while deftly uses alter egos to critique the rift between personal yearnings and the pressures of societal expectations. His protagonists, Jack Worthing and Algernon Moncrief, utilize invented personas to navigate and subvert the rigid moral landscape of their world. At its core, the play revolves around the artifice of identity. One has to adapt a very high moral tone on all subjects. It's one of the things that makes marriage so uninteresting. The characters' alter egos, Jack as Ernest in the city, Algernon's invented invalid friend Bunbury, are not just comic devices but coping mechanisms for evading suffocating social norms. This duality dramatizes the conflict between private desires and public duties. Jack Worthing embodies the struggle for authenticity. In the country, he is Jack, guardian to Cecily and a model of responsibility. In London, however, he adopts the identity of Ernest, a libertine bachelor. This split is not merely for pleasure but to manage the demands of two different worlds. When one is in town, one amuses oneself. When one is in the country, one amuses other people. This admission exposes the hypocrisy required by Victorian respectability. Public virtue hides private indulgence. Then we have the portrayal of marriage in The Importance of Being Earnest, or how marriage is depicted as a social contract rather than a romantic union. Consider the motivations of Lady Bracknell, Gwendolen, and Cecily in your answer. In The Importance of Being Earnest, Oscar Wilde satirizes the Victorian attitudes towards marriages by depicting it primarily as a social contract rather than a romantic union. During the late 19th century, marriage was deeply intertwined with class, wealth, and social status, often serving to consolidate wealth and power rather than to celebrate love or personal compatibility. Wilde brilliantly exposes the transactional nature of marriage through his characters and dialogues, highlighting the superficiality, absurdity, and hypocrisy underlying Victorian matrimonial conventions. Wilde's play portrays marriage as pragmatic contract chiefly concerned with social standing and economic security. Romantic love is either absent or secondary to maintaining appearances and navigating social expectations. This theme emerges through the views and motivations of key characters such as Lady Bracknell, Gwendolen, and Cecily. Lady Bracknell epitomizes Victorian pragmatism about marriage. She treats matrimony as a business transaction defined by status, wealth, and lineage. Her interrogation of Jack Worthing, focused on his unknown parentage and financial prospects, satirizes the mercenary attitudes towards marriage prevalent in the upper class. She bluntly dismisses Jack for being an orphan, illustrating how social origins eclipse personal merit or affection in marriage consideration. To lose one parent may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Her approval of Jack only after uncovering Cecily's considerable fortune further reveals the importance of financial alliances in marriage. Then you have the significance of the title, The Importance of Being Earnest, or how does Wilde play with the pun in the title, or about the dual meanings of the word, and what does this reveal about the character's values and the play's central message. The title of Oscar Wilde's Importance of Being Earnest is a brilliant pun that encapsulates the central themes of the play. Wilde plays on the dual meanings of the word earnest as both a proper name, earnest, and the adjective meaning being sincere, honest, and serious. The pun foregrounds the tension between appearance and reality, sincerity and superficiality, which runs throughout the entire play. By focusing on this linguistic double, Wilde not only sets the tone for his satirical comedy but also critiques Victorian social values regarding identity, morality, and seriousness. Then we have analyzed the role of class in the play, focusing on Lady Bracknell's worldview and the obstacles faced by Jack and Algernon. How does Wilde use class distinctions to derive the plot and satirize social mobility? Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest richly satirizes the rigid and often absurd class distinctions of Victorian England. Central to the play's social critique is how class governs relationships, marriage prospects, and identity. Lady Bracknell, the embodiment of aristocratic values, upholds the rigid social hierarchy and acts as the gatekeeper of class respectability. The obstacles faced by Jack and Algernon highlight the social tensions and contradictions surrounding class and mobility. Wilde uses these class distinctions not only to drive the plot's comedic complications but to expose the narrow-mindedness, hypocrisy, and self-interest underpinning Victorian social structures. So you can just go through. I think these are all important questions from The Importance of Being Earnest. The Way of the World by William Congreve, we have The Way of the World as a restoration comedy of manners, or as a mirror to the contemporary society, or as a restoration comedy. The Way of the World by William Congreve is a quintessential example of restoration comedy of manners, a genre that flourished in England during the Restoration era, 1660 to 1710, following the re-establishment of the monarchy under King Charles II. Restoration comedy of manners is defined by its witty dialogue, satirical treatment of social customs, and focus on the amorous and mercenary lifestyles of the upper classes. It holds up a mirror to contemporary society, ridiculing its pretensions, follies, and manners. The Restoration era began in 1660 with the return of Charles II to the English throne after the Puritan Commonwealth. This period saw a revival of theatre and arts suppressed earlier. Restoration comedy emerged as a dramatic form during this time, roughly from 1660 to 1710, characterized by its urban settings, unmarried gallants, fops, rakes, coquettes who indulge in intrigues involving love, marriage, money, and social advantage. The plays catered to the courtly and upper-class audience that relished sharp wit and sexual innuendo in a mercenary and pleasure-seeking milieu. Characteristics of Restoration comedy of manners. Wit, sharp, clever dialogue full of wordplay and quick exchanges is central to the characters in The Way of the World, which is demonstrated brilliantly as when Mirabell wittily remarks on marriage, "You should have just so much disgust for your husband as may be sufficient to make you relish your lover." Then we have social satire. The plays mock societal norms, focusing mainly on the behaviors, pretenses, and the hypocrisy of the aristocracy, exposing their vanity, greed, and sexual immorality with irony and satire. Focus on marriage and sexuality. Marriage is portrayed as a mercenary venture rather than a romantic union. Adultery, intrigue, and fortune hunting are common motives. The characters include stylish men, flirtatious women, and often men obsessed with clothing, and promiscuous men. For instance, Millamant is a restoration flirtatious woman and a representative of the contemporary society. The plays are set in a sophisticated London society reflecting metropolitan upper class life. The characters use elegant language, refined etiquettes, and display polished graces. The comedies often reflect the immorality of the time, showing characters lacking deep emotions, driven mainly by lust or greed. The play begins in a refined social setting, a chocolate house, which was a fashionable meeting place for the upper class during the Restoration period. Then we have to go through the important instances where Restoration comedy features are mentioned in the play. Then we have the famous scene of The Way of the World, which is called the Proviso scene, because Mirabell and Millamant lay down precise terms for their future marriage. The scene is a brilliant display of wit, sophistication, and social realism, capturing the essence of Restoration comedy of manners. This answer is a bit large, but you will just go through the entire play through this answer, which is very important for your understanding. And also, if something else comes within the summary of the play, you can go through it and write it. Then we have the character of Lady Wishport. Lady Wishport, a central character in William Congreve's The Way of the World, is portrayed as a vain, foolish, and somewhat tragic old widow, desperate to cling to her youth and beauty. Her character embodies both comic and pathetic traits, which are developed through detailed scenes and dialogues in the play. In Act 1, Scene 1 of The Way of the World, she laments her appearance within the line, "I look like the old peeled wall, thou must repair me, foible, before Sir Roland comes," which highlights both her self-consciousness and the urgency she feels to present herself attractively before her suitor's arrival. This quote epitomizes Lady Wishport's desperate attempts to mask her age and sustain a facade of youth and desirability. Her vanity is not only about physical appearance but also closely tied to her social ambitions. Lady Wishport is proud and vain, craving admiration from those around her, which makes her vulnerable to flattery and manipulation by others. She exhibits a pronounced desire for a young husband, reflecting both her insecurity and her wish to enhance her social standing and personal allure through remarriage. Lady Wishport's attitude towards Mirabel reveals her vindictive side. She harbors hatred for him because he once pretended to court her, a deception that wounded her pride deeply. This reveals her suspicious and vengeful nature as she guards her dignity jealously and is quick to punish those she perceives as having wronged her. Her persona encapsulates the anxieties of a woman of her age and class in the Restoration era, struggling to navigate societal expectations related to beauty, marriage, and authority. Her reliance on cosmetics to maintain appearances reflects a deeper fear of social and personal obsolescence. Lady Wishport is portrayed not only as a figure of vanity and pride but also as a tragicomic character whose desperate clinging to youth and status exposes vulnerabilities and invites both sympathy and satire. Then we have the character of Mirabel, which is the central figure and the hero embodying wit, intelligence, charm, and strategic acumen. His significance lies not only in his role as the protagonist and lover of Millamant but also a representation of the ideal gentleman in Restoration society, who combines cleverness with grace and emotional insight into social dynamics. Mirabel is portrayed as a resourceful and cunning gentleman who masterfully navigates the social labyrinth of arranged marriages, wealth, and social reputation in early 18th century England. His main objective is to marry Millamant, Lady Wishport's knights, but this goal is complicated by Lady Wishport's opposition and the schemes of other characters. To achieve his aim, he engages in elaborate strategies such as pretending to court Lady Wishport himself to ultimately win her consent for the marriage. Congreve crafts Mirabel as a complex character not purely virtuous but morally ambiguous, which lends realism and depth. Although he openly admits to having been the lover of Mrs. Fennel, who is now married to his friend Fennel, Mirabel is nevertheless the heroic figure. He shows tact, clever irony, and a notable capacity for self-criticism, which distinguishes him from mere roguish types. I think that's it from The Way of the World. It will be enough for your preparations. From Look Back in Anger, we have the character of Jimmy Potter as the archetypal angry young man and discussing how his personal frustrations reflect the broader social discontent of post-war Britain. John Osborne's play Look Back in Anger introduces Jimmy Potter as an archetypal angry young man, a term used to describe disaffected post-war British youth who express frustration and rebellion against social stagnation and class inequality. Jimmy's character encapsulates the personal and societal discontent that defined Britain in the 1950s, a period marked by economic hardship, rigid class structures, and a loss of identity among the working class. Look Back in Anger was written during a time which Britain was recovering from World War II but struggling with economic limitations, class divisions, and diminished imperial pride. Jimmy Potter represents the voice of the new frustrated generation caught between traditional class expectations and the desire for authentic meaning and equality. Through Jimmy, Osborne critiques the complacency of the upper middle class and the disillusionment of a working class individual educated but trapped in menial work. His anger is both a personal response to his perceived failures and a symbolic outcry against post war social injustice. The introduction of rage and alienation from the play's outset, Jimmy's anger is evident in his harsh criticism of society, his wife Allison's family background, and his own life circumstances. His bitterness is both specific and broad, targeting personal relationships and national identity. Jimmy declares, I hate it. I hate this country like hell. I can't bear this country anymore, and yet I can't leave it. This encapsulates his inflicted, conflicted sense of belonging, deep resentment mixed with an inability to escape his social environment. This quote sets the tone for his role as a spokesman for the angry young frustrated by Britain's unwillingness to change. His aggressive and often spiteful interactions with Allison and his friend Cliff reveal his internalized frustration. He projects his anger onto those closest to him, demonstrating the psychological toll of his social alienation. Jimmy's actions frequently stem from selfish motives, and the abusive behavior towards Allison vandalizes any heroic traits he might possess. Then we have comment on the ending of the play Look Back in Anger. John Osborne's Look Back in Anger ends on a complex and emotional charged note that encapsulates both despair and fragile hope, reflecting the cyclic nature of the character's struggles and the broader theme of post-war disillusionment. The ending is significant for its portrayal of reconciliation between Jimmy and Allison, which symbolizes a tentative bridge over their previous emotional and social conflicts, as a recognition of shared human vulnerability. The conclusion of Look Back in Anger, after escalating tensions between Jimmy Potter, his wife Allison, and Helena Charles, culminating in emotional crisis. Set in post-war Britain, the play interrogates issues of class, identity, and personal despair. The ending reflects both the persistent social malaise and the possibility of personal understanding. It avoids social resolution, emphasizing ongoing emotional complexity rather than neat closure. At the climax, Allison returns to Jimmy after suffering a miscarriage, an event that profoundly alters her perspective and softens her previously distant and complacent demeanor. Her return is complicated by pain and humility, which contrast sharply with her earlier detachment. Jimmy, who has been left emotionally isolated after Helena's departure and amidst his friend Cliff's growing independence, finds himself confronting the fear of loneliness and loss. Jimmy's softening attitude is revealed in his heartfelt appeal to Allison. I may be a lost cause, but I thought if you loved me, it need not matter. Then we have the symbolism and imagery in Look Back in Anger, with special significance to the beer and the squirrel game. This game is very important for the understanding of the total play, and it is a very important question as well. John Osborne uses symbolism and imagery extensively to deepen the emotional and thematic resonance of the play, with the bear and squirrel game standing out as a crucial symbol that reveals much about the complex relationship between Jimmy and Allison Potter. The symbolic game, along with other imagery such as the trumpet, the ironing board, and the newspapers, provide insight into the characters' inner lives, social struggles, and the broader post-war British context. Within the mid-1950s, Look Back in Anger captures the frustrations of the post-war generation caught between rigid class structures and personal aspirations. Osborne employs symbols to express the character's psychological states and social conditions. Indirectly yet powerfully, the bear and the squirrel game, in particular, becomes a metaphorical space where Jimmy and Allison transit their turbulent marital conflicts and societal pressures, assessing a simpler, more innocent form of connection. The bear and squirrel game is a vivid and recurring symbol in the play. Jimmy and Allison imagine themselves as these animals. Jimmy as the bear, a large, strong, and sometimes aggressive creature representing masculine strength and frustration. Allison as the squirrel, small, delicate, and nervous, embodying feminine vulnerability and social constraint. The stuffed animals kept on their dressing table serve as a physical reminder of this game and its symbolic power. Escape from harsh realities, the game acts as a psychological refuge for the couple, allowing them to momentarily set aside their anger, class conflict, and emotional pain. Osborne writes that they imagine themselves as little furry creatures with little furry brains, living in a world with only simple needs, food, shelter, and cleanliness, where the complication of human society and their troubled marriage cannot intrude. Symbol of marital failure and complexity. The game also reflects the failure of Jimmy and Allison's marriage to thrive in adulthood. Their animal personas reveal their need to retreat from complex human emotions into a more instinctive, uncomplicated relationship. This can be read as a coping mechanism against their emotional estrangement and societal frustrations. Then we have the character of Cliff, or Cliff as a foil to Jimmy in Look Back in Anger, and how it is significant to the contrast to the play's themes. John Osborne utilizes the character of Cliff Lewis as a foil to Jimmy Potter, heightening the play's exploration of post-war British social tensions and individual emotional responses to alienation. Cliff's contrasting personality and the demeanor serve to emphasize Jimmy's explosive anger, personal frustrations, and complex psychological turmoil, thus deepening the play's major themes including class struggle, interpersonal relationships, and social discontent. Cliff Lewis is a poorly educated working class man of Welsh heritage who works with Jimmy at the sweet stall and shares the flat, but he is more easygoing and less intellectually volatile than Jimmy. He is described as warm, loving, and humorous, traits that contrast sharply with Jimmy's irritable and sarcastic temperament. While both men come from similar social backgrounds, Cliff accepts his lot with quieter acceptance, rarely displaying Jimmy's anger towards the upper class or British society. Instead, Cliff is easy and relaxed, almost lethargy, with the rather sad, natural intelligence of the self-taught. This makes Cliff a stabilizing presence in the turbulent household, grounding the play's conflicts and illuminating Jimmy's emotional intensity by comparison. Cliff Lewis acts as an essential foil to Jimmy Potter with his calm, good natured, and tolerant demeanor, emphasizing Jimmy's intense anger and alienation. I think it will be enough for Look Back in Anger. Thank you.